Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the workshop today. We'll get started in exactly 1 minute from now. All right, so I think we can get started. Thank you so much again for joining this session. This is Vineet. I'm the development lead at Accelirate, and I'm currently based out of Houston office. So today I'm pleased to welcome our special guest, Victor from UiPath. He's a document understanding expert. And we also have Jason with us today. He's an amazing machine learning developer from our team. He's currently based out of our Miami office. So Victor and Jason, maybe if you can take a minute to introduce about yourselves and share your experience and passions, that would be great.
Yeah, Vineet. So my name is Jason Valladares. I'm located here in the Miami offices in Sunrise. Passions include programming, learning more about AI, machine learning, and solving competitive programming problems. I really love algorithms and data structures, some of my favorite software things to program about. And I really also like solving business problems. It interests me a lot.
Good to hear that, Jason. Thank you.
Hi, this is Victor Bautista. I have been a developer, software engineer, and also a technical account manager for UiPath for about 2.5 years. And my specialty really lies in the document understanding space. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
Victor, I think your audio got a little muffled.
Hi, can you hear me now, Vineet?
Nope, it's still not audible. Yes, please give 1 minute for Victor to join back, guys. Thank you. So in the next 30 minutes, we will walk you through the concept of document understanding, and we'll also share an amazing business case that we recently executed for one of our customers. Victor, are you back?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Apologies for that. I just had my Bluetooth disconnect.
No worries.
So yes, thank you. You can start the first slide and I'll do introductions and then move through the slides.
Sure. With that, I'll pass it over to you. Moving on, JT. So in the next few minutes, we want to talk about the concept of document understanding, and we'll also share the business case. So starting with the first part of the document understanding, taxonomy is the first component which is critical as part of the document understanding concept. And the second part of this involves the digitizing of all the documents. And the classification and metadata extraction is really, really critical as part of the document understanding concept. And right after we're completely done with the first 4 parts of the document understanding, validation of each data and exporting the metadata from the raw PDF formats into Excel parsable formats and also the email structure is really critical. Moving on. So extraction and interpretation of data from structured documents. For example, the invoice can be in PDF format, or it can be an RPA format, or it can be a handwritten one, or it can be a scanned structure as well. And for the semi-structured documents, we have the text and variable parts like tables, samples of semi-structured documents. For example, it can be invoices, or it can be receipts, or it can be purchase orders as well. And moving on to the analyzation and extraction of the metadata from complex unstructured documents. So it can be from emails, it can be disease descriptions, or it can be drug prescriptions. So document understanding handles all of these modules without any possibility for the data inaccuracy or without any possible manual errors. Moving on to the human effort. So document understanding involves a lot of human effort, and we will also automate the entire end-to-end process using the bot. So a good number of common use cases as part of document understanding involve processing invoices, processing receipts, processing the purchase orders, and we'll also look at a good number of financial services and insurance clients. And we also have human resource engagements. We have a few clients from manufacturing where we will process the sales orders. We will also process the customer parts requests, and we will also address the remittance processing. Moving on. So we would like to share a business case that we recently executed for one of our major financial clients. So just to give you a brief idea about the problem statement, our client had around 134 gas stations within the US region, and 64 unique vendors used to deliver the gas and freight invoices on a daily basis. Now, each of these vendor email invoices, they used to email that to the account payables team, which would fall under the Department of Finance. They used to email about 500 to 700 gas and freight invoices per day on a dedicated shared mailbox, which is called as AP gas invoices and AP freight invoices. And our client team consists of about 25 SMEs, subject matter experts, who are responsible for reconciling these invoices on a daily basis. And they had an SLA of about 24 hours. And the reconciliation process is completely done in a third-party software application called Pinnacle Fuel Smart. So if you look at the invoice formats, they exist in both PDF, it can exist in RTF, or it can also exist in email format. Now, each of the subject matter experts used to spend about 2 minutes on each invoice for reconciliation process. And on top of that, each of these vendors, they can act as supplier, they can act as the carrier, or they can also act as both supplier and carrier. Moving on. So each of these gas and freight invoices received on the shared mailbox, they can be a single page or it can be a multi-page document as well. So to manage this shared mailbox, 2 subject matter experts were dedicated, and they used to manage this mailbox AP gas invoices on a daily basis. And each invoice consists of about 5 mandatory fields, and they also had 2 optional fields. So if you look at the mandatory fields, invoice number, invoice date, BOL, and invoice amount used to be mandatory fields. And looking at the optional fields, vendor name and invoice due dates are completely optional. Moving on. So going into the engagement, our automation goals were to process all gas and freight invoices. And we also wanted the bots to handle any kind of scanned or unstructured data. Now, we also wanted to reduce the employee fatigue and eliminate any kind of manual reconciliation errors. And our also goal was to increase the number of invoices processed per day. And we wanted to process all the invoices with the highest possible data accuracy. And we also wanted to increase the confidence interval of 90%. Moving on.
Okay, guys. So over here is a high-level overview of our document understanding solution for this client. So as Mustafa stated, all of the invoices were actually being sent to the shared mailbox. So these invoices came in a couple different priorities, either being as an email with attachments, and these attachments can vary in their file formattings as PDFs, RTFs, or even other random attachments. And then we also had emails which the bodies were the actual invoice. So these are automated invoices that had custom software written by me in order to transfer that into a PDF. So now once the shared mailbox is essentially being looked at to grab all of the incoming emails, we now have these gas invoices, which we can then save to a shared drive location, right? So we would save all of the attachments and convert any RTFs or any file formatting to a PDF, or just convert text, literal email bodies into PDFs, which once shared, we can now digitize this invoice in RAM. So now that the invoice is now digitized in RAM, we can classify it in order to split it correctly. So splitting is a crucial step, as many of these invoices would not only come, let's say, in multiple different formats or multiple attachments, but within a single file, there would be, let's say, 30, 40, 50 invoices. And each of these invoices would vary. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It would vary from 1 to 2 pages. Like the first 2 pages were one invoice, the next page would be another invoice, and then 3 or 4 more pages down is another invoice. So the splitter had to be dynamic enough in order to color that correctly. But once we had all the splitting done, it was a matter of sending each of these individual invoices to the machine learning model. So this is the DU instance that we had up and running on our cloud. So once the machine learning model went ahead and analyzed the results, we now have extracted metadata, and using a couple algorithms created by us, we then figure out some confidence intervals, and depending on these intervals, we either have 2 paths. So if the confidence is not as high as we'd want it to be, we would go to the human validation station in order for certain fields to be validated or for the document to just be looked at by a human. And if it was high enough, then we just go directly into reconciliation, which would go ahead and pay off this invoice and enter it into the FieldSmart database. And after all of that's complete, we would essentially have business reports. At the end of the day, there would either be SAP reports generated or reports generated from the actual UiPath queues, either or. So moving on to the next slide. Here are some examples of the actual documents we had to handle. So these are 2 of the 3 situations we discussed earlier. One of the situations would be, for example, imagine the freight invoice of ACE there was sent as a scan, then we would have to treat it a little bit differently, as it's not a true PDF. But this one is actually a true PDF. The one in the middle is a body, so the body of an email that had to be converted to a PDF. And each of these are essentially classified using UiPath's keyword-based classification system. So by leveraging that code, we were able to essentially just classify these documents based on keyword sets and word vectoring that allowed us to correctly identify each of these as either BP, SICO, or ACE. So the document classification mainly deals with using a taxonomy manager and a taxonomy. So this is your taxonomy file. Now, how we leverage this in our is by having the group ID, category ID, type ID being unique identifiers for each of our. So we use the group ID to be our client name, then we use our category to be whether it's a supplier or carrier, and then the document type ID to actually be the vendor name. So this supplied us unique identifiers, which they played into using classifier, the keyword-based classifier, and then also played into using our custom algorithm for our splitting. Now, one major step and one of the important steps in the machine learning and the DU aspect of the process was the actual model. So the first step we had to take was to train the model. And even a step prior to this you could think of is gathering the data. So it's very important putting good data into your model in order to get good results out. It's the magic of having large data sets, which just produces beautiful data that comes out of it. If you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So we went ahead with our client and gathered a data set which we were going to train the model on. So luckily, UiPath has done a lot of the work for us, which entailed having the invoices model already created for us. And this invoices model worked wonders, except we needed a custom field. So in order to adjust for this, we had to introduce this custom field, right, by leveraging the already existing table model to account for that, which was the bill of lading field. But once we did all of that and we had our data set ready, we essentially trained upon the original hundreds of thousands of invoices delivered from the pre-trained machine learning model from UiPath. And we labeled these using the AI Fabric instance in the data manager. So once we labeled all of our fields and we went ahead and sent it to a supercomputer to generate the algorithm, we then packaged up our model into a Docker image. And all of this happens in the AI Fabric cloud instance. It's very straightforward. So once we package our model and we have our Docker image, it's all about validating the model. So we would deploy the model to our environment in our client. Then we would run a bunch of analysis on this model and then actually present that to the client and allow them to figure out and get comfortable what they want, what they can expect from the model, right? So this would give us our understand what's wrong and what's right. And then once all of that's complete, we go ahead and we actually monitor the model by using the different queues and queue reporters to go ahead and look at the different results of actual data that's being processed. So the human validation portion, this is a very, very critical part, as any invoice that doesn't meet your confidence interval would go ahead and be sent to the validation station. So now once we're at the validation station, we the business users would go ahead and validate all of the data here. So the neat part about the validation station is not only is a job done by the human, but the person who's labeling the data is also training the model in the background. So all this data is being saved in such a way where it could be retrained later and be fed into the model in order to not have to relabel data. Right here is an actual concrete example of what the extraction actually looks like. So these screenshots here are actually from our AI Fabric instance, which shows what the model believes to be the different fields. So you see it has the invoice date, the invoice number, square in a vector. Same thing with all the due date and the balance total. The BO you see that have multiple, that was one our part task of this problem, getting these multiple BOLs to be extracted. So the model was very easily and readily able to do this just simply by labeling using supervised learning. It was very simple. And then once the model is able to identify these, to the right is an example of what this would look like in terms of like the JSON or the data that we're being returned, how it would look like and what we could get. It's a representation of the object. And I'll go ahead and pass this on to.
Thank you, Jason. So we wanted to share a few process and solution specific metrics along with the key performance indicators that we have established within this engagement. So if you look at the average invoice size, it used to be at around 60 KB. And the average number of pages that we used to receive in terms of invoices was around 6 to 8 pages. And we were able to complete the entire source code development in 14 weeks. And we opted for waterfall model over agile methodology. And we were able to complete the hypercare period within 4 weeks. So in these 4 weeks of hypercare period, we were able to fix all kinds of enhancements. And depending on the feedback that we received from the end users, we were able to address all their concerns. And moving on to the key performance indicators, we were able to reduce the employee fatigue. They were really getting tired to process 700 to 800 invoices per day on a 24/7 mode. So we were able to reduce that stress on the employee. And we have also increased the invoice processing volume So initially it used to be at around 200 to 500. Now that stands at around 800 to 1,000 invoices per day. And Tuesday is a peak day for the business, and they used to receive around 1,000 invoices on that day. So we were able to achieve the ROI figure of $180,000 on an annual basis, and this would significantly increase as the client adds more and more vendor invoices. So at this point, we have 64 unique vendor invoices, but the expectation and the assumption that we have by end of this year is that number would significantly increase to 200 vendor invoices. So we were able to digitize all the client invoices within 3.4 seconds. That's a significant accomplishment from our team. And in terms of classification of each document, we were able to do it within 3 minutes, 10 seconds with 90% confidence interval. Moving on. We will be happy to take any kind of questions on the
All right, so there's a few questions. Victor should be back now. Victor, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. Before we get to the questions, while everyone's submitting them, do you have any more thoughts you want to add on document understanding?
Thanks for that, Megan. Yeah, apologies for the Bluetooth and audio connection, but these guys did great in explaining everything in here. The only main part that I wanted to highlight, guys, is the use cases, right? The use cases that we showed before, that's just a snippet of the use cases that we can do. And that's where I always suggest people and companies to start with. And the ones that you saw, for example, invoices, receipts, for example, licenses, passports, those are things that can be done across different multiple enterprises and areas. And we have already machine learning models for that. So that I just wanted to highlight that at those points.
Perfect. All right, the first question we have submitted is what were the most challenging aspects of this document understanding implementation?
I can take that, Megan. Thank you. Thanks for asking. That was a very good question. So I would definitely say deciding on the OCR engine. So when we moved into the engagement, we opted for OmniPage OCR. And as part of the unit testing, we have noticed that OmniPage OCR was not able to capture few of the decimal values. For example, if you say, if you have the invoice amount as $300.15, it was capturing as $30,015. So as soon as we noticed that as part of the UAT and the unit testing, we switched it back to intelligent OCR from UiPath, and that really worked wonders for us.
Okay, cool. Victor, any thoughts?
No, that's spot on.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, what's the best first step when looking to start a document understanding process?
Jason, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. So a good first step, I would say, is looking at your data. All right. So the major factor to everything is looking at what you're actually going to be processing, right? So I would worry about that first. For us, it was a matter of getting actual invoices, looking at it, seeing if it was truly structured, unstructured, how the format, how they look. And from there, you could kind of realize, okay, I should take this path or I should take that path. In terms of an OCR engine, if they were all perfect, beautiful PDFs, I would just choose OmniPage, right? But if they were not, then you would have to go through a more robust, maybe a cloud solution like UiPath Document OCR, depending on what your actual problem is pertaining to, or the documents you're looking at. You would take different paths. But the major step is just looking at those documents, realizing either how good they are, how bad they are, depending on the situation, and then from there coming up with a plan to actually solve it. And then that could also come down to realizing how you're going to train your model, if you're going to use a pre-trained model or use an AI fabric instance to go ahead and build a model, and so on and so forth. So just looking at your data, I would say, is a major step.
Yep, and if I should add something to that, Jason was spot on with that. And the second part, which I think is also very important, is the quality of the documents that you guys have. If let's say some of your documents are really bad quality, then you should ask yourself, is it worth it to scan these documents, right? Because regardless of whether or not you're going to take information from there, somebody else is going to still be looking at them. So that will be the second important question to ask.
Agreed.
All right, perfect. Next question. For a new project, would the use case need to fit the one that has already been developed, or do you build fully unique solutions from scratch for each client?
Vineet, would you like to take this one?
Sure. So we
I can take this one. This is Ahmed, Chief Automation Officer. This is a good question here. Look, I think from a solution standpoint and very specific to document understanding itself comes with a bunch of models for documents that are pre-built. And as Jason alluded to earlier in his portion of the presentation, those models can be modified as well. So for things like invoices, sales orders, receipts, and the list is growing. Victor can add to this, but the list is growing by the day. So of course you can have a great jump start to the project by utilizing one of those pre-built. And this is all in the context of document understanding. You can start with one of those pre-built, or if you don't have it, the document understanding product comes with a beautiful thing called Data Manager. Where the Data Manager, you can upload your samples, and all you need to do is say, here's the fields that I'm looking for out of a document. Here's this field on this document. Here's this field on that document on the different formats, and then that very quickly generates a model that you can use in your automations. The other flip side to this is, of course, the systems that you interact with, so on and so forth, and that's generally bespoke for every client.
All right, perfect. It looks like we have one more question. How difficult was it to test the new fields and add new fields to the model?
Jason, that's a good question for you. How difficult was it?
It was very simple, actually, surprisingly simple. So all we had to do was in the AI Fabric instance, us and the folks at UiPath, we went ahead and we added the new endpoint, which would be the model we wanted to extract, which in our case was the BLs, the bill of ladings. So the first step we took was adding this in the AI Fabric instance. Then after that, figure out how we were gonna train on this specific field. And in our case, since BOLs can come in multiple formattings in terms of either as a one or multiple tables, we decided, okay, table training would be best for this in terms of how the data was structured. Then from there, we went ahead and created it as a table, right? And then in our data manager, we went ahead and started labeling these. And then after labeling all of this, we were basically up and running in a matter of days. And we had it ready, and we were able to prepare reports for the business. It was quite simple and very, very straight through.
Perfect. I think there's another question here that I can see. How much variation can exist between individual documents? I mean, taking invoices for an example, they come in all shapes, sizes, and flavors. I think it can be a fairly variant. The more variation you have, the more samples you would need to train. Victor, you wanna speak from your experience in terms of what the varying degree is? From our experience, I can tell you that we have done documents that are fairly, just invoices, POs, and receipts and things like that. They come in all shapes and forms. The factor that goes into training that is just more training data so that the models can be more accurate.
Yeah, but you're right on spot there. And this is not only true for different information around the page, it's also true for different languages. Our models even work with multiple languages in the same document. The only time where you really should, start talking to Accelerate more in depth about what can and cannot be done is whenever you have information around the page that's unstructured and there's no label around it, right? Like let's say somebody puts different types of numbers. It could be the invoice number or it could be the employee number. You don't know. That's when you really need to take a little bit more consideration and talk with your experts to see if it's doable.
Perfect. I think we're right on time. Unless there are any other questions, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Victor, for joining today.
Thank you, guys. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Have a great day.